Around 2002, Calgary's streets became a battleground for rival gangs, their histories intertwined with crime, violence, and arrests. Among the names etched into the city's gang landscape, one stands out: Jackie Tran, born Tran Trong Ying Nguyen, a man whose life intertwined with drugs, violence, and legal battles that stretched for nearly a decade. While the feud between the fresh-off-the-boat gang and the FOB killers claimed headlines, Jackie Tran's name was one of the names repeatedly mentioned by the media. Born in Vietnam, Tran came to Canada in 1993 as a child, unaware that the path he would walk might one day land him at the center of the Canadian immigration system, and a deadly criminal feud that would leave many young men dead. Jackie Tran was in the 5th grade when he arrived in Canada. His father, who was a refugee who had fled Vietnam in 1983, had already moved on, leaving the young family to navigate a new world without him. The city's streets, schools, and neighborhoods became Jackie's home, but the absence of a father left a gap that Jackie would feel throughout his youth. He grew up in the neighborhood of Monterey Park, where he was well-liked by neighbors and the community. Someone who grew up in the neighborhood at the time was quoted saying, "When I was a little kid, Jackie Tran was my neighbor in Monterey Park. The other kids on the street, and I walked his dog and mowed his lawn and stuff. He would give us money all the time to do random things in the neighborhood, like cleaning up and keeping an eye out for his baby sister." It seemed like all the parents on the street liked having him around, even though they knew what was up. Like many children of immigrant families, Jackie carried responsibilities beyond his years. His mother, disabled by a workplace injury, relied on him. By grade 11, the pressures were too great. Jackie left school to work as a glazier, cutting and installing glass, a job that demanded precision, strength, and long hours. This put him in the middle of workplace tensions that could quickly flare. It was in this environment, among co-workers and daily friction, that one of Jackie's first major incidents occurred. While working at a mirror and glass company, a dispute over a glove escalated into a life-changing moment. One of Tran's co-workers was a 17-year-old high school student named Akol Rini. It was reportedly the first time the two had met. According to Rini, a supervisor had asked him to throw out some garbage. As he gathered the materials, he noticed a glove lying nearby and picked it up, intending to throw it away with the rest of the trash. Rini later recalled that Jackie immediately grabbed the glove from his hand and told him not to take it. Rini attempted to explain that he thought it was garbage and would simply put it back. But according to his account, Tran wasn't interested in discussing it. What had started as a misunderstanding over a work glove quickly became a confrontation. Then things escalated. According to reports, Tran produced a small knife. Within moments, Rini was cut. The injury was serious enough that it later required medical treatment. The confrontation shocked colleagues and marked the beginning of a criminal record that would follow him throughout Calgary. To authorities, the incident demonstrated how quickly a routine disagreement could escalate to violence. For Jackie, he was arrested and the conviction resulted in a fine. At the time, it may have appeared to be a relatively minor entry on a growing criminal record. 2 years earlier, in 2000, he had been convicted of drug trafficking. Tran once said he began dealing crack cocaine shortly after dropping out of high school, a decision driven by what he described as a lack of supervision and no money. It was a crime serious enough to trigger a deportation order under Canada's Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. But what followed would be a legal battle spanning years, revealing a tangled web of criminal associations, family struggles, and the limits of Canadian law. After the incidents, the courts assessed Jackie's risk carefully. He received a conditional sentence of 2 years less a day for the drug charges and a fine for the assault, indicating that the justice system saw a young man capable of rehabilitation, not a hardened criminal. Authorities argued Tran hadn't simply made mistakes. They argued he was a persistent public risk. By this time, the Canadian government had already issued a deportation order on the grounds of serious criminality. However, Tran appealed that order, which allowed him to remain in Canada while the appeal processed. Authorities could not deport Jackie because his appeal was still active. During the legal struggle, the media helped paint a human side to his story. Despite all his troubles, Jackie was effectively the de facto parent to his 9-year-old stepsister, managing her school, medical appointments, and daily care. It was also reported that he was the only income earner in his family. He was paying taxes, earning around $26,000 a year, and had been working to keep them afloat. But the mounting pressures of life and past convictions took their toll. Jackie Tran eventually found himself in front of the Immigration and Refugee Board. The Canada Border Services Agency alleged that he was or had once been a member of a criminal organization, pointing to his known connections and past criminal record. In 2004, the Immigration and Refugee Board declared him inadmissible to Canada, a permanent resident now at risk of being sent to a country he barely remembered. Despite allegations from police and the Canada Border Services Agency of gang involvement, Jackie insisted his interactions with people known to have gang ties were purely social. In later court hearings, he testified, "I don't ask them, and they don't tell. I am not a gang member. I never threatened anyone," he said. Yet authorities remained skeptical. As Jackie continued to deny being a gang member and fought to remain in Canada, court records from 2005 raised questions about whether he had truly distanced himself from criminal activity. One example came from an Alberta Court of Queen's Bench decision, involving a man identified as Nia Trongwin Tran. It was a name strikingly similar to Jackie Tran's legal name. According to the court record, on the evening of May 22, 2005, members of the Calgary Police Service Target Enforcement Unit, a specialized unit focused on organized crime, stopped a black vehicle near the Deerfoot Trail and Memorial Drive area. The driver was the sole occupant of the vehicle. Officers discovered that the vehicle had multiple Traffic Safety Act violations, including registration and license plate issues, resulting in the vehicle being seized for towing. The court record states that the driver asked officers to retrieve personal belongings from the vehicle before it was towed. During the process of collecting those items and conducting an inventory search, police located what they believed to be drugs inside the vehicle. Officers later discovered a black case containing a loaded handgun along with thin gloves. The firearm was described in court records as an unregistered handgun with its serial numbers filed off. The accused was arrested and ultimately faced a series of charges, including allegations involving cocaine trafficking, methamphetamine trafficking, and firearms offenses. Court records indicate that a total of 12 charges were laid. But allegedly the officers' accounts didn't line up. The cover officer testified that his partner returned with the drugs and the gun, and that there was one arrest at about 1920. Written reports and notes from the scene repeatedly described the drugs as being under the seat, not plainly visible. Those discrepancies mattered. At trial, the judge found the Crown failed to prove the drugs were in plain view and concluded Tran's charter right against unreasonable search had been engaged and breached. The seizure and the way it was described by police were undercut by inconsistent testimony, and the court called the plain view evidence insufficient. Despite the similarities in name, location, and timeline, we cannot conclusively identify the accused in the 2006 court ruling as Jackie Tran. But the timing aligns with a period when police and immigration officials were increasingly scrutinizing Jackie and his alleged connections to Calgary's FK gang. Gang investigators later testified that Tran was linked to several people who had been killed or hurt in gang-related attacks. Just months earlier, in February of 2005, Jackie was identified by police as the intended target of a shooting. Investigators pointed to this situation, claiming that Tran posed an ongoing risk to public safety, claiming that the multiple attempts on his life were by rival gangs, arguing that the attacks reflected his ongoing connections to the criminal world. Jackie's legal situation was already hanging by a thread. He had been fighting a 2004 deportation order for years, arguing that Calgary was the only home he truly knew. But sometime in 2007, when he was scheduled to appear for a critical immigration appeal hearing, Jackie did not show up. That absence changed everything. The Immigration and Refugee Board issued a warrant for his arrest, It meant that from that moment on, Jackie could be detained at any time, so the government could move forward with removing him from Canada. He wasn't hiding, but he was avoiding immigration enforcement. He was not reporting, and he was not showing up when required. On paper and to authorities, that made him a flight risk. As 2007 came to a close, Calgary was about to witness one of the most significant gang-related killings the city had seen in years. Just hours before the calendar turned to 2008, 23-year-old Mark Kim was gunned down in downtown Calgary after leaving a meeting with his probation officer. The brazen daylight killing sent shockwaves through the city and immediately intensified fears surrounding the escalating conflict between Calgary's rival gang factions. The news was undoubtedly crushing for Jackie, who was now carrying an active immigration warrant, yet he still chose to attend the previewing ceremony to pay his respects. The event, however, was crawling with police and surveillance, making his presence both risky and highly consequential. As Jackie Tran arrived at the funeral home in Forest Lawn, the place was heavy with grief and the quiet murmurs of mourners. The atmosphere was tense, charged with sorrow and subtle unease. What Jackie didn't see, but the authorities had meticulously planned, was that police were waiting, monitoring every entrance and exit. Cameras flashed as officers moved in to arrest Jackie at the funeral home, marking the moment with public scrutiny and media attention. People in attendance reacted instantly. One shouted, "Show some respect," as Jackie was handcuffed and escorted out. Following the arrest, Jackie was transferred from Calgary police custody to the CBSA, where a detention review would determine the next steps before deportation. CBSA officials emphasized that criminals are not welcome in Canada and confirmed that Jackie would be deported to Vietnam, his country of citizenship, once the process was finalized. During the detention review, CBSA officials and Calgary police emphasized Jackie's gang associations and criminal record, noting that he was connected to the FK gang and involved in violent and drug-related activities in the city. Jackie Tran, 25 years old at the time, tried to defend himself. Speaking from the remand center, he described himself as a hard-working glass cutter, paying taxes and supporting his family for years. He acknowledged his first drug trafficking conviction as a misstep, emphasizing that he had no serious convictions since. Despite this, the IRB and CBSA officials remained firm. Jackie's breach of previous conditions and failure to appear for hearings, combined with his criminal record, made him a flight risk. Ultimately, the review confirmed that Jackie would remain in CBSA custody pending deportation. He was now officially under the full control of immigration enforcement, with deportation looming. Any chance to remain in Canada legally required navigating the complex appeals system, but his recent actions had severely weakened his position. From the chaotic moment at Mark Kim's funeral to his current detention, the trajectory of Jackie Tran's life reflected both the intertwined loyalties of gang life and the unforgiving machinery of immigration enforcement. Each step now brought him closer to being removed from the country he had called home since childhood, forced to confront a future in a country he had not lived in since he was 10 years old. Jackie Tran was 25 years old, and his life had narrowed to a concrete cell in the Calgary Remand Center. 4 years earlier, immigration officials ordered him deported, but he appealed, and for a while, life continued. Tran had lived in Canada since 1993, nearly his entire life. But because he had never obtained citizenship, only permanent residency, his 2 criminal convictions, drug trafficking and assault with a weapon, triggered the legal grounds for deportation. After his January 2008 arrest at Mark Kim's funeral in Forest Lawn, Jackie Tran was taken into custody on an immigration warrant, the culmination of nearly 4 years of legal wrangling. The warrant was issued because Tran had failed to appear at a critical Immigration and Refugee Board (IRB) hearing in December 2007, making him technically on the run from immigration authorities. Police and CBSA officials emphasized that he was a permanent resident found inadmissible due to serious criminality. Despite the gravity of his legal situation, Tran was briefly released later in January 2008. His release was conditional. He was required to abide by strict bonds, including financial guarantees, an 8 p.m. curfew, and reporting requirements to the IRB. These measures were designed to allow him to continue life in Calgary while still ensuring he would appear for the ongoing deportation proceedings. For a short period, Jackie Tran had attempted to maintain a semblance of normalcy. However, the shadow of his criminal past and ongoing immigration issues lingered. By October 2008, he was once again in trouble. A Calgary police surveillance unit said they spotted him in a vehicle at night, a situation that constituted a breach of his release conditions. Police responded to a stabbing outside a Kensington lounge. While Tran was not involved in the stabbing, Constable Scott Bertrand, an officer with extensive experience and hundreds of prior arrests, recognized him while following up on IDs from bystanders. Constable Scott Bertrand identified Tran as a man seen in an SUV. Tran's identification led to his arrest at home for breaching his release conditions, a violation that demonstrated a pattern of non-compliance with both criminal and immigration law. His lawyer, Jolene Fairbrother, argued that the encounter with police was brief. A man passed out in a car for mere seconds and questioned the credibility of the officer's testimony. The IRB, however, upheld the arrest, citing Bertrand's experience and training, and ruled that Tran remained a flight risk. But during a hearing on November 14, 2008, another man made it unclear if this sighting was a case of mistaken identity. Sean Paul Roberts, who has had multiple arrests himself, testified that he was the person in the SUV that night, not Tran. Immigration and Refugee Board member Mark Tesler highlighted critical details, such as the prominent scar across Tran's forehead, which Bertrand had failed to note. The personal testimony of Tran's closest supporters also weighed heavily. His mother and his longtime girlfriend, Dawn Go, both testified that he had been at home at the time of the alleged breach. Dawn recounted, "I phoned him 4 times that night on the landline at his mother's house, where he is required to live." Tesler noted that Dawn's parents had posted 2 $10,000 bonds for Tran's release, giving them a vested interest in ensuring he abided by his curfew. Combining this evidence with Roberts' testimony, Tesler concluded that, on the balance of probabilities, Mr. Nguyen was at home on the night in question, abiding by his curfew. As a result, Tran's release conditions were reinstated, and he was no longer considered a flight risk, clearing the way for his next deportation appeal scheduled for November 20, 2008. On November 20, 2008, Jackie Tran returned to the Immigration and Refugee Board for his long-awaited deportation appeal. After nearly 6 years of legal battles, from his original removal order in April 2004 to repeated delays, arrests, and misidentifications, this hearing was critical. The room was tense, reflecting the high stakes. If the appeal failed, Tran would remain in Canada only temporarily until deportation could be enforced. If successful, he could continue to fight to stay. During the proceedings, the focus was on both his past criminal record and his ties to the community. Tran's legal team highlighted his early mistakes, but emphasized his rehabilitation since 2002. They underscored that he had no further serious convictions, had maintained steady work, and had been the primary caregiver for his 9-year-old stepsister. Witnesses testified to his daily presence at home, his adherence to curfew, and his efforts to maintain a stable life, despite intense scrutiny from law enforcement. Amid the legal battles, Tran's personal responsibilities added another layer of complexity. He had been the de facto parent to his 9-year-old stepsister, handling everything from school meetings and medical appointments to daily care. However, due to the protracted legal proceedings, periods of custody, and his repeated arrests, Alberta Child and Family Services intervened, removing the girl from his care. Tran's lawyers argued that this separation was not only a humanitarian concern, but also a reflection of the instability forced upon him by the deportation process. His role as caregiver had been one of the few stabilizing forces in his life, and losing that responsibility weighed heavily on both him and his family. It was a poignant detail in the hearing. The IRB had to consider not just his past criminal record and alleged gang associations, but also the human impact of uprooting a permanent resident who had become a central figure in his family's life. Witnesses during the appeal emphasized Tran's dedication to his stepsister and the efforts he made to maintain her well-being, arguing that deportation would sever those bonds and destabilize her life even further. This aspect of the case underscored an important debate at the heart of Tran's fight: whether he should be treated solely for his past offenses, or also considered in light of the family and community ties he had worked to maintain. To many in the courtroom, this was one of the most emotional parts of the hearing. Tran was no longer only fighting for himself, he was fighting against breaking a family apart. His lawyer argued clearly, this is not just about public safety. It is about the well-being of a Canadian child who relied on Mr. Tran as her primary source of stability and emotional support. The argument landed. Even the board acknowledged that the situation complicated the case beyond the usual criminality and deportation framework. During the November 20, 2008 hearing, after hours of testimony, documentation, and argument, the Immigration and Refugee Board ultimately ruled that the alleged curfew breach had not occurred. The board found the police officer's identification to be unreliable, especially given that he failed to note Jackie's distinctive forehead scar and accepted Sean Roberts' testimony that he, not Tran, had been the individual seen in the SUV that night. However, the deportation order remained in place. CBSA continued to classify him as a public safety concern, and the government made it clear that they were not stepping back from their efforts to remove him from Canada. After nearly 6 years of legal battles, detention hearings, public controversy, and appeals, the fight was over. Jackie Tran, born Tran Trong Ying Nguyen, was placed on a plane under escort and flown out of Canada. On Friday, March 5th, officials from the Canada Border Services Agency confirmed what many had been waiting to hear. "I can say that Jackie Tran is not here anymore," said CBSA spokesman Richard Huntley. "Once individuals have exhausted all of their avenues of due process, they will be deported." Tran had left Calgary on Tuesday quietly, without the media present. When the plane landed, he was back in Vietnam, the country he had left at 10 years old, a place he no longer knew. When the plane doors opened in Ho Chi Minh City, Jackie Tran stepped out onto foreign soil, a country he hadn't seen since childhood. In Canada, he had been labeled a danger, and to the streets of Calgary, he remained a symbol of a war that scarred a generation of young men and a product of a system that failed to reach them. You've been watching The Jackie Tran Story, an investigative documentary examining one of Calgary's most widely reported deportation cases during the city's early 2000s gang conflict. This documentary is presented for educational, historical, and journalistic purposes only. Many of the events discussed involve allegations made by law enforcement, immigration officials, or media organizations at the time. Unless established through court findings or public records, allegations remain allegations. Throughout the documentary, we have attempted to distinguish between verified facts, court findings, witness testimony, and claims made by investigators or other parties. Every effort has been made to present the historical record as accurately and fairly as possible. Thank you for watching.